Okay, so I'm going to pick up where I left off. We just got through Satan and what his purpose as a wordsmith is, and how perhaps the judge can be seen in the same light. I'm going to move forward. There is some additional notes. I wanted to make note of that there's a dying squatter. Essentially, after they meet the squatters and sort of in this little hollow of a fort that they're holding out against the Indians with. And of course, when I say Indians, I'm using the language in the book and of the time, so don't mean anything by that. I prefer the term Native Americans myself, but I think that that term, just to be consistent so that you know literally what I'm referencing, would be probably a little bit easier in terms of finding a reference point. Okay, so it's only meant as a reference point. So there's in this moment as they leave this fort, there's sort of this what I call gallows humor. You may want to make note of that because there are some humorous elements in here. It doesn't seem that way, but one of the things about maybe tone is if I could go into that just for a second. The idea of tone is pretty important when you're trying to figure out kind of what the purpose of a writer is. Okay, what I mean by that is that is the tone of, say, an essay humorous? Is it serious? Is it informative? You might think of yourself as a writer and think of what tone you want to set. And so what happens is that the language follows suit, right? So if you want to be just informative, you don't want to be overly humorous because that would take away from the seriousness of this information that I'm trying to give you. On the other hand, if you're sort of trying to get something across in sort of an engaging way, you may want to have a more humorous tone. So there's a little bonus on tone. But in this case, if we want to reference Blood Meridian, the humor of this dying squatter in that he's laying there dying, of course, he's a dying squatter, and he's like singing this song from this church hymn. And so as they're writing out, one of the things that gets mentioned is when he sings this hymn, this sort of it sounds very godly and beautiful and childlike and innocent, and it's actually it actually brings these really hardened people back to their youth. So it's a very his singing is very beautiful, and it sort of represents sort of his dying moment of calling to God, and it evokes God. And then he interrupts it with some cussing and stuff like that, and then he goes on, and they're like, and the spell is broken, and then he moves back into this singing that's sort of so evocative. So I liken that to what I call gallows humor, or it's referred to as black humor sometimes, quote unquote. Gallows humor is basically the humor that you have when things are darkest, right? Hence the term black humor. Dark, when things are so dark that they can't they don't seem to have any hope. People will sometimes joke. I don't know if you may want to think about that, if you've done that before. Why does that happen? Well, why do you just like, oh man, I think that's what it is. It's that, when you're like going to the gallows, so to speak, meaning like when you're about to be hung, when like a criminal is about to be hung, in the olden days, there would often be like some kind of humor involved. And on the part of the person, not always, and maybe not even often, but that humor is sort of like a, well, what are you going to do, right? When all hope is lost, all you have left is maybe you say a little joke that you don't really mean to be funny, but kind of is anyway, and you sort of chuckle to yourself because what are you going to do? I mean, there's not much else to do. So that I just wanted to point that out. It's probably a good example of tone. Obviously, there's many examples of a dark tone, violence, as setting the tone. Landscape will set the tone sometimes, but in this case, it's a particular scene of gallows humor. So a few quotes that I wanted to go over. Every man claims to have encountered the judge somewhere. Okay, that's our first clue that maybe the judge, being so evocative and so charismatic and so seemingly able to master everything, there's something to do with legend here, right? And so one of the things that maybe we want to start asking ourselves when we do see the judge is, are we supposed to take this literally or not? Are these tales literally told? And later on, when I give you some review and some background, once we finish more of the book, so that I don't want to do any spoilers, um, I'll give you some background into how Paradise Lost is connected, or not Paradise Lost, how Blood Meridian, sorry, is connected to the actual events that happened at the time. And I referenced that a little bit in the introduction, but I'll go over that a little bit more later on. In this, what I call story 2, meaning the first story is the story of that traveler, that sort of weird story that didn't seem to have much purpose other than maybe to tell a tale of this. It was the tale of the beggar that goes to this place and this home, and he's taken in, and the wife is really like taken with this traveler, and the guy that lives there is also very taken with him, and they become friends, and then he eventually kills him, and then the son of the guy that kills him finds his grave, or is told about this on his dying deathbed, on the man's deathbed, and it meanders around a lot, and I'll sort of leave that open to interpretation until we can get back to it maybe a little bit more specifically. Maybe I'll reference the stories in either the midterm or in the review later on, but this is story 2, where the meeting where the judge was first encountered. There's a story that's told by one of the Glanton gang about how as they were wandering around and being chased by natives, they encountered the judge, and so the judge and them sort of wandered this landscape, this really hellish landscape, where there seemed to be cloven hoof prints. There was sulfur and brimstone, it seemed like, very evocative of sort of a hell. Of course, when we first encountered the judge, if we use that Paradise Lost reference, which is what the PL is, this all seems very natural, right? It's a very poetic sort of imagery of hell, matched with the judge, who is a stand-in for Satan in some cases, in this book, as I've referenced before. So what he says a couple of times, and just when they're sort of at their most desperate moment, and they're surrounded, he starts to say, the judge just seems to be like, don't worry about it, I got it. And we don't know exactly what he means, and everybody's like, hey, you're kind of crazy because we're about to be killed by all of these natives. And so he says, don't worry, the Mother Earth is an egg. And then he goes off on this seemingly senseless rant about how the earth will provide, don't worry. And so what winds up happening is he uses the brimstone and the sulfur and the piss too, because that activates something, and then they dry out this muddy thing and this muddy concoction, and then it turns out that he knows how to make gunpowder, and so they create gunpowder for their guns, and they're able to ward the natives off. So in literal sense, the Mother Earth was an egg, as in, it provides, if you think of an egg as being sort of a single cell that will eventually grow into something, right? That's what an egg is. It's an embryo, right? And then you can probably understand maybe a little bit more in retrospect after this story is finished what he meant by all of this. Okay, so one of the questions that I ask, I think I still reference this in the discussion question, is what is he the judge of? And that is a question that literally gets asked in the book. And so when that question is asked, I don't know, when I first encountered it, it was like, yeah, that's a really good question. What is he the judge of? He seems to be, there's the kid, who's like, we first think that this is going to be what they call, I'm going to mispronounce this, Bild's Roman, which is like a coming-of-age tale. But then we encounter the judge, and then we think, well, he's going to be a judge. He's going to judge things. And he does judge things in a way, but one of the questions that gets literally asked is, what is he the judge of? And so when we do encounter what he is the judge of, when the question is actually literally asked, what is he the judge of? The answer seems to be, we don't really ask that question. Why don't you go ask him? And so the person that asks this sort of slowly slinks away like, I ain't going to ask him. So in other words, the judge just is, okay? And that's the best answer probably that you can give sort of in the moment. but ultimately the bigger question maybe is just in the context of the story, you may want to ask that of yourself. Okay, going into chapter 11 quickly. And this is just a single chapter. There's a bear attack. The Delawares, they go look for their companion. The camp is in ruins of the old they camp in the ruins of an old Indian village, I should say. And then the judge copies and throws away items. These are some of the highlights that I think are going to be meaningful for you later. And then this is the traveler story that I referenced before. Okay, so I referenced it as story 2, story 1 essentially, but that's the story of the traveler, and this is where it appears. Okay, so if I got those backwards, I apologize, but that's kind of how this goes. Those are the 2 extended stories that I may wind up referencing. Okay. As for the notes here, the description of the Delawares is pretty interesting. Essentially what happens is they get attacked by a bear, the whole group. One of the Indian brothers gets grabbed and drug off, presumably, is killed and going to be eaten by the bear. And so the Delawares say, okay, give us a couple days, we're going to go find him. And everybody's like, are you crazy? Why do you need to find his body? I mean, he's dead, right? Let's just keep moving. But they say, don't worry about it, we got it. This is just what we do. This is part of it. And so they say, okay. So eventually they do meet up later. Presumably they found him and did whatever ceremony, that they had to do in their own eyes. But one of the quotes that I thought was very interesting, and it told me a little bit about that the worldview of the Delawares is a little bit different than this sort of nihilism, fatalism kind of thing that we've been balancing with the Glanton gang, if we pay too close attention to that. If much of the world were mystery, the world was not. Seems kind of a circular thing, and you may want to sit on that for a little bit, but my take on stuff like this is that when it does pop up, for me, little alarm bells go off and say, that sounds meaningful, but what does it actually mean? Sort of like those quotes at the beginning of the book, right? It's like the more we look into them, the more we kind of understand maybe a tone. There's that word again. Right? If much of the world were a mystery. So in other words, if there are a lot of things within the world that are mysterious, correct? I mean, there's a lot of things you don't know. There's a lot of things I don't know. There's a lot of things I'm unsure of, right? Doesn't necessarily mean that you can't find some meaning in everything, right? So the world itself is not necessarily a mystery because we couch it in terms that we can understand, right? So if much in the world were mystery, and this is the Delawares, right? The Delawares thinking the world was not. Okay, so they have a world view. They have a vision of this world that incorporates maybe this, random bear attack, right? It's like, oh, I didn't know I was going to get attacked by a bear today, but hey, that's life. This is nature. It makes sense in the broader context. And I think that's where that quote might be useful. And other quotes kind of like that. So every now and again, when you do see something like philosophical sounding, you may want to pause and just sort of hold it in your brain, maybe write it down, and then return to it later and see if it winds up being useful. And then the other quote that I have here is, we camped in the ruins of an older culture. Very symbolic, right? If we think of it as these new people coming in and taking over, they're camping over the ruins of older cultures, right? They're decimating cultures and sort of laying their groundwork for a new culture, right? It's very, literally that's what they're doing, right? With the expansion, with the Western expansion of the United States. All right. Well, that's what I got for you. Hopefully these were meaningful and helpful to you, and I will see if I can get some more stuff squeezed in. But for now, I will have to see you later.